Hello, everyone. We are doing a session on sponsorship and settlement partnership, improving the settlement of privately sponsored refugees, learnings from our ARI project and pilot. So welcome, everyone. So I'm just going to start off while we're waiting for some attendees, introducing our lovely presenters. So here we have from the YMCA of Three Rivers, Anna and Andrea. Thank you so much for showing up. We also have Stephanie from the Mennonite Central Committee of Ontario, and from the Allies of Refugee Integration Project, myself, Lorene, and Michelle Ball. So thank you all. Thank you so much. Oh, there goes my presentation. 1 second. Very quickly, Andrea is a language assessor and settlement worker at the YMCA. She's also an immigration practitioner. Anna is the immigrant services leader of YMCA of Three Rivers. Stephanie is the migration and resettlement program assistant at Mennonite Central Committee. And Michelle and I are both project coordinators for our. So thank you all for coming. I will put my screen back on. So you can't see them because you can only see me speaking, but soon they will show their lovely faces. Thank you all. So, very quickly, our agenda for today. We're going to go through our welcome, a little bit about the Allies for Refugee Integration Project, and then we will get right into the pilot with the YMCA of Three Rivers and the Mennonite Central Committee of Ontario, looking at what they've been doing through our pilot, what they have learned, and what does this mean for the general resettlement of refugees? What does it mean for all of you who are interested in this topic? And then we'll get right into the Q&A. So just a gentle reminder to please use the Q&A button at the bottom of, because then you can vote for the questions that you want to see answered. And that way it's a little bit more manageable than using both the Q&A and the chat function. So please use the Q&A function. S'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. So thank you so much, everyone. We're going to start off with a quick poll. So we just want to get a little bit of a general idea of who is in the room today. Please tell us about yourself. Are you representing a settlement sector, the academic sector, government, a sponsorship organization like a SAW, or something else that we haven't covered here? So I'll give a little bit of time for you to answer a question really quick. Please tell us about yourself. First, the goals of today. So from our pilot, we're going to learn about the successes and challenges and takeaways from the partners piloting an innovation pilot. So this is an SDI project funded by IRCC. And so it's an innovation branch pilot, three-way case management model. So here you're going to learn what you can do to improve settlement sponsorship teamwork, specifically between settlement agencies, SAWs, and sponsors, and improve the service delivery for sponsored newcomers. So I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Michelle, from the Allies of Refugee Integration Project. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Lorene. Yes, so it's great to see you all here today, and not see you, of course, but to meet you here in this virtual space. So I'm going to start us off. We're using a lot of acronyms, a lot of project names, but it's important that you understand what the Allies for Refugee Integration Project is to set the stage for our pilot partners to share about their experience. So this project, as Lorene mentioned, we are in our final stage of a 3-year project funded by IRCC under the Service Delivery Improvement Funding. And this was a collaboration of OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants, and Refugee 613. And this project began from what we were seeing on the ground and what many of you might be seeing on the ground. The fact that sponsors and settlement workers were not always working well together, even though they are natural allies in supporting privately sponsored refugees. We were seeing sometimes these actors were duplicating efforts, or perhaps they were struggling to understand their roles and responsibilities in practice. And it was often leaving privately sponsored refugees, or PSRs for short, leaving them stuck in the middle. So that's kind of where it started. And we went through a process, if you want to go to the next slide, of research and co-design to figure out what exactly were those issues and how could we address them together as a sector. So the aim was to enhance the settlement support available to privately sponsored refugees. And first, though, we had to begin with a research phase. We worked with more than 250 stakeholders across Ontario and beyond, and we asked them through many different formats to share with us, their common experiences, their gaps and challenges, and maybe most importantly, what are their suggestions for how to improve this settlement sponsorship relationship? And there's a full research report available if you're curious about that research. Came out in 2019, and it is on the Feedloop platform if you would like to download it there. So following research, we did a series of full-day co-design sessions across Ontario to work with those on the ground to really design pilot prototypes that would respond to those top concerns that people had brought forward. And those kind of top concerns they had included improved settlement planning, improved connection to services, and more opportunities for knowledge sharing. And so more than 15 pilot prototypes came out of those sessions. And if you go to the next slide, our last phase was pilot testing. So we did select two of the most important ideas that were brought forward in that. And over 2020, we worked with a number of partners to pilot these ideas across Ontario. You can see here some of the logos of our many partners who we worked with on this. And I want to take this moment to just thank them for an amazing year of learning together. The first pilot is a knowledge exchange pilot, where we created opportunities for sponsors and settlement to meet and share more informally. But today, what we're going to learn mostly about is this case management pilot. This pilot kind of tested a pre and post arrival idea that formalized a three-way case management model where that newcomer has a more intentional, supportive connection into services. And with this, I'm really going to turn it over to our partners at the YMCA. They're going to share kind of a case study and sharing what they saw in testing this in Kitchener-Waterloo area over the last year. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Lorene, I'm just going to ask you to go back one slide. We're not quite there yet. Perfect. Thank you so much. So my name is Stephanie. I work for the Mennonite Central Committee in their Ontario office. MCC has been a sponsorship agreement holder, or a SAW, with the Canadian government and a leader in the private sponsorship of refugees program since the PSR program started in 1979. We partner with a diverse group of sponsors across the province, including faith and non-faith-based groups in both rural and urban settings. Though we highly recommend all sponsors to connect to a settlement agency, not all sponsors decide to do this. It's for a variety of reasons, including not all sponsors are aware of what supports settlement organizations can provide. Many sponsors rely on their own informal networks of knowledge and support, and some sponsors don't know how to engage well with settlement agencies or how to communicate what their exact needs are. Over to Anna for a moment.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. My name is Anna. I work with the YMCA of Three Rivers with Immigrant Services Department. And we are the SPO in this picture. We're the service provider organization. So YMCA of Three Rivers covers a large geographic area, including the region of Waterloo, with Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, but also Guelph, Stratford, and Perth County. YMCA Immigrant Services is one of the primary settlement agencies within the region of Waterloo that acts as a first stop for newcomers to the region, and we support them with the settlement process through a comprehensive client-centered approach. Within the settlement sector in our region, we provide such services as community settlement services, language assessment, school settlement services, community connections, employment, youth services to eligible newcomer clients. Traditionally, however, we have not been able to work directly with sponsorship groups. There's some limitations with our funding. This pilot has provided us the unique opportunity to expand our services and connect with sponsorship groups, for which we're very grateful, because this was an attempt to better support our privately sponsored refugee clients in a more coordinated way between the different agencies and including the sponsorship groups. Over to you, Stephanie, I think.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, the YMCA and MCC have previously collaborated, and we were both really excited about the opportunity to that this pilot provided to formalize the ways that we work together to support privately sponsored refugees in the Waterloo region. Through this pilot, our goal was to test a three-way case management model of bringing together the SAW, the SPO settlement agency, and the sponsors together to collaborate on providing effective settlement supports for privately sponsored newcomers. And Andrea will lead you a bit through that process.
Lorene, could you take us to the next? Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I'm a settlement worker and language assessor at the YMCA of Three Rivers. For the purpose of this pilot, I was the settlement worker working with our sponsorship groups and our privately sponsored refugees. When we came together for this pilot, there were 5 steps that we took to form the case management model. As you can see on your screen, those steps included a pre-arrival meeting, post-arrival meeting, YMCA intake, ongoing services, and then an evaluation. Initially, when we came together, we planned on supporting 8 new arrival clients and their sponsors. However, this process changed once COVID hit. Well, with COVID, we had fewer new arrivals, and so we had to adapt our project to also support clients who were previously sponsored and were coming to the end of their sponsorship. These clients were high needs clients and would benefit from the case management model. We refer to these clients as our month 13 clients. When we started the pilot, the first step was a pre-arrival meeting. Our goal was to meet with the sponsorship group, SAW, and settlement worker to review the roles and responsibilities of each member and how our roles will relate to the newcomer. We created what we call the collaborative action plan, or what we also refer to as the CAP, to clearly show who is responsible for supporting each need for the settlement of the newcomer. And I will explain a little bit further on the next slide in a bit about the CAP. So with the pre-arrival meeting, we started the pre-arrival meeting in person, but after COVID hit, we had to shift everything to become a virtual meeting. For our month 13 groups, we met with the sponsors prior to meeting with the clients to learn more about the client and share with the sponsor what my role and responsibilities were as a settlement worker. We wanted to set the expectations from the start with the sponsors before we met with any of our clients. Step 2 of the process was a post-arrival meeting, and this is when the settlement worker met with the sponsorship group and the newly arrived client to explain our roles and relationships together. With COVID, we were unable to do this with any of our groups in person, and with the lack of technological understanding, we were unable to meet face-to-face online with some of the groups. In many of the cases, I moved to step 3 of the process. However, there was a case where we were able to complete a post-arrival meeting with the sponsorship group and the newcomer. Although we were only able to successfully do this with one group, it became quite apparent how important the post-arrival meeting was to ensure better success and understanding of each party's role. The client was able to understand the connection between the sponsor and their settlement worker. The next step was the YMCA intake, and this is where I had a one-on-one meeting with the clients to meet with them and expand on what their needs may be. I met with clients over the phone, online, and in person to create a settlement plan based on their needs. This was done for all of my clients, both the new arrivals and the month 13 clients, and it's the same process that we take with any of our settlement clients. Step 4 of the case management pilot was ongoing services. I provided continuous check-ins with the clients that had high needs or many needs. For the clients who did not have many immediate needs, I still checked in at least once a month to see how they were doing. MCC, as the SAW, continued to check in regularly with the sponsorship groups, and YMCA and MCC also had regular check-ins with regards to the sponsors and the clients, and this allowed us to proactively provide support when needed. Step 5 of the process was evaluation, and this is when participants in the pilots were interviewed by ARI, and outside of the pilot, the sponsors will continue to be surveyed by MCCO, and the newcomers will continue to have access to the settlement services offered by the YMCA. All right.
When interviewed, one of the sponsors shared, "This intentional connection to a settlement worker provides a linkage to help on that journey for the newcomer towards independence," highlighting the great benefit of the pre-arrival connection to a settlement worker.
When we first came together for this pilot, we developed and shared a document called the Collaborative Action Plan, or what we like to refer to as the CAP. And you can see that here on your screen. And I believe it's also going to be shared with everyone so you can have a chance to review it on your own time. This document was first used in the first meeting with the sponsors to identify and explain the roles and responsibilities of the sponsors, MCCO, and the YMCA. It was used with all of our new arrival clients. And the original goal of this form was to use it on an ongoing basis throughout the sponsorship, referring back to it, assuring that the needs of the client were being met. When we first created this document and shared it with our first 2 sponsorship groups, it was not easy to use as it contained way too much information. We then adjusted the CAP to clearly outline the roles and responsibilities of the sponsors and settlement worker. And with the updated version, we noticed that the form was much easier to administer and share with the sponsors. The sponsors expressed how great it was as a reminder at that beginning session as to what they were going to need to do with the client and how the settlement worker would support them. The form became a tool that we used during the pre-arrival meetings with the sponsorship groups as a reference, and then it also became a tool that we use in cases where responsibilities needed to be clarified.
So this is my turn, I guess, to talk about successes, which is always a very pleasant task to do. So when we started this project, we had several main goals in mind. We wanted to improve privately sponsored refugees' awareness of the settlement supports available to them during their first year in Canada. We wanted to improve sponsors' awareness of the settlement services that are available to support them and to support their PSR clients, as well as we wanted to help them to establish clear roles and responsibilities from the very beginning. This knowledge and understanding we felt was important to make sure that PSRs have consistent settlement paths during their first year and are independent enough at the end of the first year to take on some of those roles onto themselves, going on to month 13. This also helps alleviate sponsor burnout from our point of view. We also wanted to improve cooperative work and understanding of each other's work between the SAW, so MCCO in our case, and the SPO, so the YMCA of Three Rivers and Immigrant Services in our case. As in terms of successes in this 1 year, we were able to serve 14 newcomer clients and 8 sponsorship groups through this project. We saw an improvement and really good cooperation and coordination between the SAW and the SPO. And then overall sponsors and clients have reflected on their connection to Andrea. So thank you very much, Andrea. It's been extremely helpful and informative. We held joint trainings for sponsors and newcomers on transition to month 13 and financial literacy. Something to be noted here, month 13 clients were introduced to this project as a result of our COVID-19 pivoting kind of procedures, because they were not originally included in the project. But we did include them and we were able to support month 13 clients also. And I think we're going on to the next slide. Lorene, if you don't mind, which talks about strategies that enabled us to be reaching those successes that we talked about in the last slide. So some of the strategies were to have one point of contact within the settlement organization, but that point of contact was also providing access to language assessment, school settlement, community connections, employment services, and youth programs within the same organization, as well as connections to other organizations and supports available in the community. This approach, we felt, guaranteed warm referrals for our clients and continuity of support. Another strategy that we applied was consistent communication, and Andrea touched up on that already a little bit. So once a month, we connected with clients and sponsors that did not have constant immediate needs. And then more regular contact was there for high needs clients requiring immediate or prolonged support throughout that year. And then we did organizational check-ins between the SAW, MCCO, and the SPO, in this case us, to reflect on lessons learned. That SAW-SPO relationship allowed for flexibility to support high needs cases better. Thank you very much. Over to the next person on the next slide.
So as we started this pilot, COVID-19 threw a few challenges our way. We weren't expecting some of these challenges. And so the first challenge was transitioning to virtual support. We had never worked online before. This was the first time we were offering settlement services online. And we discovered it was much more difficult to establish trust and open communication with clients and sponsors while working online. In some cases, clients were not comfortable using video chat apps. And so there was no face-to-face communication. To them, I was just a name that they received emails from, or I was a voice that they talked to on the phone. It takes a lot more time and interaction to build trust this way. And it's also easier to confuse and misunderstand tones and expectations online. So that was the first challenge that we noted. The second challenge was border closures and fewer new arrivals. When we first started the pilot in February, we received 2 new arrivals, and then the borders closed right away. So we had no new arrivals from March till September. And so we had to adapt the pilot, accepting month 13 clients, and these were clients that were transitioning off of their sponsorship. And then once the borders reopened in September, we then received a few more new arrivals. It was also a challenge supporting some of our clients. Connections and referrals to some organizations was difficult to make, as other organizations may have not had in-person appointments, or their support was only offered online. They may have had reduced hours. So this was a challenge. For example, language assessments were not originally offered online. The community programs, such as the library services, where clients go for computers and internet, those were closed, so they had no access to that. Businesses such as Service Canada had limited hours, or offices were closed, and so clients weren't able to get their social insurance numbers. So these were some of the challenges that we ran into. We also noted that there's a heightened anxiety from both the clients and the sponsors with regards to the transition off of their sponsorship. So with COVID, our clients have been unable to network and gain Canadian work experience. And so they're worried about how this is going to impact them once their sponsorship ends. They're currently relying on their sponsors' financial support, and they're unsure and uncertain as to how they're going to succeed within the workforce without any experience. So there has been a few requests from our sponsors and our clients if they can have an extension within their sponsorship to avoid this challenge. With their challenges, though, we also had to find new ways to strategize and pivot these challenges. And so one way that we did this was to focus on flexible communication. With technology, there are many ways to connect with our clients, and we tried to use as many as possible. So I connected with my clients through phone calls, email, Zoom, WhatsApp, and other platforms that were available. And we also had in-person appointments when COVID restrictions allowed us to do so. So we jumped on that as soon as we could. We also had to be flexible with the pilot criteria, accepting month 13 clients. As a result of the first lockdown, there were no new arrivals, but at the same time, we also had sponsorship clients who were here in Canada who still needed support, and they were going to benefit from the 3-way case management approach. We thought that would be helpful for them. These clients, their sponsorship agreement was coming to an end during the lockdown, and they still needed support, but were uncertain as to where to go in these cases. So these clients were selected to participate in the pilot, and the ones who were selected to participate in the pilot were facing barriers that were preventing a smooth transition to independence from their sponsors. For example, one client was struggling for independence due to her low literacy skills and was successfully connected to other supports in the region as a result of the pilot. Within 8 months, she has become independent and confident within her own ability to integrate within the community. She's able to complete her daily tasks and without the support of her sponsors, which she originally couldn't do. So these have been some of the strategies that we took and successes that happened from our pivots. Thank you.
Moving now to the lessons learned and the impact on the different participants in our project. We weren't able to have any newcomers or sponsors join us today, but we wanted to make sure that their voices were also included. So as part of our interviews and evaluation, we pulled some of the quotes that were shared. So the first one, Lorene, if you don't mind changing slides, perfect. The first one is from a newcomer participant, and they shared, "These interactions with the settlement worker are wonderful. We don't know anyone here yet and only met our sponsors a few times because of COVID. It is helpful to ask questions, how to get different documents, and more." Through a direct connection with Andrea, newcomers reported feeling increased independence. A settlement worker is a great resource and a connection for newcomers, especially for those who arrived in the fall during lockdowns and during COVID, when so many things were closed. To have that direct connection to Andrea was very helpful. In addition, the model lessened the anxiety of newcomers and sponsors about accessing necessary supports and enabled smooth transitions off of sponsorship to what is known as month 13, which Andrea just shared. The next perspective is from a sponsor. If you could change slides, awesome, thanks. A sponsor shared, "We need a central place to turn. Enthusiasm in the group dissipates a lot by just trying to understand who is out there doing what. What we are missing is the process. We do a lot of unnecessary research when the pros already know. Being connected to a settlement worker enhanced sponsors' capacity, it lessened sponsor burnout, and ensured newcomers were adequately supported, especially over this past year during COVID, when community supports were constantly changing. For sponsors to be able to call or email Andrea to get updates on what supports they could access in the community was a really large strength for the sponsors, since the expertise in settlement really lies in the settlement workers' role.
As a settlement worker, there were quite a few things that I learned from this pilot, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. The first thing that I recognized was quite important was the pre-arrival connection with the sponsor. It gave me the chance to understand the sponsorship dynamic and the relationship that they already had formed with the newcomer. I was also able to learn more about the newcomer, and which that helped me prepare for what was to come once they arrived. It also provided the opportunity to establish a working relationship and set our expectations. We built trust and created open communication to avoid any other misunderstandings. This model has helped lessen anxiety felt by sponsors and newcomers about accessing necessary services. I also recognize that the post-arrival meeting was quite important as well. In the post-arrival meeting, we were able to establish a connection with the client and the sponsor. The client had a better understanding as to who was helping them and how we were all working together to support them. This way they didn't feel alone or confused. They knew who was there to help them. I learned quite a bit also about the sponsorship process. As a settlement worker, we often work in support with the newcomer, and this pilot provided the chance for me to work side by side with the sponsors as well. I learned that there are many different types of sponsors, and each sponsorship relationship is different with each client. Some sponsors are quite eager to support the newcomer. Other sponsors are tired and burnt out. And in some cases, there can be challenging dynamics, which can be expected when bringing groups together. So these are some things that I recognized during the pilot. The last thing that I noticed was there are many different ways that we can offer service delivery. However, it's very important to give the client these options, as not everyone has the same abilities and access to different ways of services. We did recognize, though, that the hybrid model of in-person and online services was quite helpful. This model of the three-way case management allowed us to work together as a team better supporting one another, and we were able to empower the independence of the newcomer, which is always what our goal is. Thank you.
At the end of our presentation, there will be a time for question and answers. So for those that are listening, if there's any questions that come to mind, there is a question box where you can input some of those questions as you listen to our presentation. So lessons learned from the settlement agreement holder perspective. Overall, this pilot project increased our capacity as a SAW to serve newcomers and sponsors better. It deepened our understanding of settlement workers, the role that settlement workers play, as well as the role of settlement providing organizations. Our strengthened collaboration with the YMCA benefited not just the groups that participated in the pilot project, but our system overall moving forward. This project has allowed MCC to think more intentionally about the best way for us to connect with a settlement agency, as well as the best way for us to facilitate these connections for the sponsors that we work with. We've seen the importance of investing time in getting to know our local settlement agencies and building relationships across our organizations. This investment in intentional collaboration and relationship will ultimately ensure that sponsors and newcomers will be supported well and know what services they can access. By building this collaboration, there is a mutual learning and training that can be shared between the SAW and the SPO. This transfer of knowledge and sharing was and will continue to be a large impact and benefit of this pilot project. So for example, the YMCA caseworkers have been invited to our sponsorship orientation sessions that we hold for sponsors. So an opportunity for caseworkers to learn more about the evolving world of the private sponsorship program. And when we've noticed emerging needs among our sponsorship groups, we've been able to collaborate with the YMCA to host webinars and trainings for newcomers and sponsors on topics such as financial literacy and the transition to month 13. Finally, the deeper understanding of how each agency operates and the strengthened understanding and relationship allowed for creativity and innovation in how we both serve sponsors, newcomers, and the community.
It's my turn. So moving forward, so what we would like to take, definitely would like to take into the future with us is the continued partnership between MCCO and YMCA. I think this has been working wonderfully, and as Stephanie suggested, I mean, that intentional connection is very important to the services, to improve the services that we provide and to support these our clients better. Our deep understanding of how each of our organizations operates has helped us to be innovative in the ways that we support our clients. We will continue exploring the hybrid methods of service delivery, so combining online and in-person services after the second lockdown ends, which I think it has ended officially now. This will likely inform and improve our cooperative work long-term. Our connections with the sponsorship groups also continue beyond this project. And I think word of mouth is helping us to connect with other privately sponsored refugees that the same sponsorship groups have sponsored, and also to other sponsorship groups as well. For high-need clients, if wraparound support is needed, we have paved the way to collaborate on support between MCCO, YMCA Immigrant Services, and sponsorship groups.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna, Stephanie, Andrea, for sharing that. I just want to take a moment, that is a lot of information you shared with us, an amazing richness to the learning that you've done in a year, and in a year where you've had to make many adaptations, be strategic. So I just want to pause and say thank you for sharing that with us. It's been amazing to see all of you professionals at work in action, doing, fulfilling your mandates, and also, bringing it to the next level, all for better support of newcomers. So it's been really a privilege to see that. But we're not done. I see some really amazing questions coming in, so keep them going. I see questions about evaluation, and that's a little bit about what I'm going to get into now. And I hope we can get into it in more detail as well during the Q&A section if you want to ask the rest of our panelists. But I'm going to now take a step back from the specific experience of MCC and the YMCA and talk about all the pilots, because we did also test this model also in the GTA with Catholic Cross-Cultural Services. We also worked with the YMCA in Windsor area, as well as a SAW there, the Diocese of London. So we have a lot of rich evaluation data to draw upon. I have to say these are preliminary feedback. At this point, our formal recommendations will be coming out shortly, but we have just wrapped up our evaluation actually this week. So I can't actually give you the final recommendations, but at the end, there'll be a link in our PowerPoint for you to sign up for the newsletter, where we'll be sharing all of that with you very shortly within the next month or so. But first of all, let's take a step back. Let's think about this in a big picture, what we're hearing so far. So definitely when we survey sponsors across all the pilots, we are hearing strong satisfaction from sponsors being connected to a settlement worker through this model. In particular, they are telling us that they appreciate having one person to go to, one friendly Andrea, if you will, where they can ask their questions in the time that they need. So it's not necessarily about being involved in a settlement journey for the whole 12 months. It's about knowing where to go when there are questions and knowing from the beginning who's going to do what, that role division. So, 4.6 out of 5 is the rating that sponsors give this model in terms of improving that healthy communication between sponsors and settlement workers. Also, as we've been doing final evaluations among settlement workers, sponsors, and newcomers who participated, there is very strong acknowledgement that they would like to see this expanded beyond the pilot project. 11 out of 12 participants strongly suggest that it should be part of regular settlement programming. And so there's a hunger for this intentional connection and this close coming together of these sectors. But we're going to talk a little bit later about sustainability, about the barriers to continuing that work, because it's not as straightforward as just seeing that it's successful. Also, just to have the newcomer perspective yet again front and center here, the impact on them is ultimately the most important thing. And all the newcomers who I interviewed, told me that this was a very helpful thing, that they knew better where it helped them navigate, essentially, especially during COVID, when they couldn't go somewhere in person necessarily, but it helped them navigate the supports available to them. This newcomer is quoted as saying, when you move to a new country, you don't know where to go. Difficult to get information. So this program was helpful to give them a direction, where to start and when to go. And it's about timing there, isn't it? Where to start. And we heard a bit about that. Challenges perhaps when clients are not connected right away until month 13 or later, and how it can delay that settlement journey sometimes. So that's some of the feedback we're hearing. And if you go to the next slide, we are definitely seeing some common threads across all the pilots in terms of some initial recommendations, and we'll break it down for audience because it kind of depends who you are. We have a lot of people involved, a lot of sectors involved in this. But in general, there's a few things that we learned that will sound familiar from what we've just heard from the YMCA and MCC, because yeah, it's really, really common kind of learning. So first of all, timing matters. That pre-arrival space is so important, especially for sponsors. to be able to understand their role as it relates to a settlement worker, right? And in addition, timing matters for the newcomer. So that quick connection shortly upon, the completion of, let's say, a quarantine period, if you need to have a quarantine period in your area, is really setting people off on the right foot. And so timing matters. The clarifying of roles and responsibilities we've talked about already, but not just in general, but specifically. So, people want to know specifically, okay, I do this, you do this, right? It's not just a general kind of, agreement. It depends on the case. Every case is different. And that's the other thing we'll talk about in terms of challenges of adaptation. I've already mentioned the desire for newcomers and sponsors to have one place to go. So we have a question about, could LIPS do this? Now, I would love to talk with all of you about this. I think that's an interesting comment. We're learning, at least in the pilots, that it's the personal connection that matters, not even just a general referral, let's say, to a settlement agency, but this is the person to go to. This is the email to connect with. And then the importance of relationship building. So Andrea talked about that, the challenges of trust and how important that is really for a successful partnership. We heard about organizational level, of course, on an individual level, there's been an impact, but I think the strongest impact we're seeing is that organizational level to manage complex cases, work together, and we definitely heard that from Anna. But before I go on, I want to point out, this is not a one-size-fits-all model. I wish it could be, right? Wouldn't that be easy to say, this is how to do it for all cases? But not all cases are the same. Every newcomer, every sponsor is going to need something slightly different. And I don't want to also gloss over the challenges or the barriers to implementing the recommendations I've just told you about. Working with sponsors for a settlement agency is unfunded. It is not a funded thing for them. In addition, SAWs have limited capacity to take on more in the post-arrival space, depending on the SAW and their internal dynamics and so on. Many of them are volunteer-based. So I don't want to gloss over those barriers. However, these pilots have shown to be effective in improving the settlement of sponsored refugees, and we believe they could be scaled up with the right support. And so we'll go into that in a second. So next slide. So what does this mean for you? So I'm assuming we're mostly a settlement audience based on our poll at the beginning. So for you as a settlement agency or perhaps a frontline worker, perhaps management, what does this mean for you? Well, one thing we're learning is that pre-arrival connection with sponsors, if you're able to offer it, it has huge benefits, as we've already outlined. And we realize there are challenges to that, but including at least sponsors in the post-arrival space, immediately post-arrival as well, can have great benefits long-term for those newcomers. The benefits of a kind of navigator role or a go-to person. So Andrea has told me about how she ended up being the PSR person, at her agency, but, she became an expert in that kind of sphere and how helpful it was for sponsors to have somewhere and sponsored newcomers to have somewhere to go to get those questions answered. From their perspective, very helpful. And training. So settlement is very complex, and so is sponsorship, and one thing we managed to do through this project across all the pilots, we trained more than 140 settlement workers across Ontario and beyond on this program, on the PSR program, and how to work with sponsors. We found it very successful, and people really responded well. A lot of settlement workers are hungry for this information because it matters to their clients, right? That's their motivation to learn how to better serve their clients, and this helps them do that. So next slide, what does this mean for sponsors? Even though we don't have a lot of sponsors in the audience, it takes both sides. So we encourage sponsors and SAWs to take the time to discuss roles, to connect with settlement at the right time, pre-arrival and shortly post-arrival. We're encouraging the formalization of partnerships And, you know, oftentimes the post-arrival space is something SAWs don't have the capacity to do so much. And so connecting that newcomer in as soon as possible, ensuring that happens is pretty important from what we're seeing. And lastly, if we have any government policymakers on the next slide, if we have any in the audience or who are watching afterwards, we really thought it was important to talk to you. None of this can happen without change in policy and without the support and buy-in from stakeholders like IRCC and other funders and stakeholders at that level. We have some recommendations that will be coming out, more formalized recommendations, but for now, what we are saying is, you know, we really need continued buy-in and funding to equip both SAWs and SPOs to be able to do this work together. We also see policymakers, you know, as could step up to assist with better connection of those PSRs to services. And on a policy level, reducing those silos between settlement and sponsorship to solve these gaps that we're seeing. And we encourage, you know, anyone in the audience to engage with us on continuing to build a more effective connection among these actors. We know there's a whole of government effort towards standardizing support for all newcomers from pre to post arrival. And PSRs are a key stakeholder in this. And so we're saying that this is part of the puzzle piece of that more continued support and more coherent support for newcomers in their first few weeks and years in Canada. So that is what it means for you. As mentioned, please continue. If you sign up for our newsletter, you can hear more of these recommendations. And but for now, I'd love to turn it over to Lorene, who will lead us through some Q&A and conversation.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. So again, a lot of information there, but I hope that it really settled in. Our questions, you can type in the Q&A. I'll get to the ones that have been posted now, but please submit your continuous questions and we'll hopefully have the time to get to them. So the first one that's been upvoted, so settlement SPOs carry different portfolios. Did you experience any gaps in services to client in this pilot? And this I will send to maybe Andrea.
Thanks, Lorene. While serving these clients during this pilot, I didn't actually find that there were any gaps. We were able to provide all the services and connections that the clients needed. In this case, we were able to also work with the sponsors, which we wouldn't normally be able to do. So that gap was closed right from the start because of the pilot. And then we just had to carry on with the regular services. So we were able to still support the clients how we normally would and make sure that their needs were met. But we were also able to close that gap that would normally be there because of the funding from this pilot.
And if I could add just one thing to that, Andrea. So you've covered how we've closed the gap for the sponsors' knowledge about settlement services, but I also feel that maybe another gap that we were trying to address was the sometimes the lack of knowledge by PSRs of the services that are available to them. And I think with this project and with specifically through connecting with the sponsorship group before their arrival and with the sponsorship group and the client post-arrival immediately, we were able to bridge that gap too.
Thank you so much, Anna.
If I could, may I add something, Lorene?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to share too, you know, from the evaluation we did, you know, over all the pilots, I want to point out that, you know, it's not always a straightforward kind of referral process and support, you know, for these newcomers. And so I wouldn't say necessarily it's a gap, but I'll give an example. One newcomer shared with me that they had been connected into this pilot for services, but they felt like they weren't getting the answers they wanted in the timely way they wanted. They wanted, you know, immediate response to their questions. And so they went to another settlement agency that better suited their needs. And I don't think that's a failure necessarily of this pilot, because it's important people have choice and can go and get the services they need where they need it and how they want. So we would never recommend this be, you know, a mandatory kind of model, because that element of choice still needs to be there. So just to say that it wasn't a very common experience, but it did happen, and it's important to acknowledge that agency needs to be there to choose how services are accessed and where, still upon arrival of that newcomer.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Our next question, you touched on a little bit. So have you done any formal evaluation of the project? So I'll let you answer this, Michelle, maybe a little bit more in depth, maybe what exactly the process was for evaluation and what we can expect in the coming month.
Sure. So because this was service delivery improvement funded, you know, we had external evaluators working with us from the beginning. We're really lucky. And we believed it was important to do an evaluation, not just at the end, but ongoing, so that we could make adjustments throughout the pilot. So, you know, ever since the beginning of the pilots more than a year ago, we have used different tools like online surveys. We did a midterm evaluation of the pilot with YMCA with interviews. And that helped us to be able to make adjustments along the way, like the CAP form that you'll see in the feed loop. That went through a round of revisions based on feedback from participants. So that was really helpful. And the goal is also to learn. It's not perfection, right? And so we learned a lot. We also completed some final evaluation interviews recently. So we do have a very robust evaluation framework. We're in the process of analyzing all that data, and it will be coming out in a few different formats. We're going to be releasing some short infographics along with the full report within about a month and a half. And there'll also be a series of webinars and roundtables we'll be doing in the spring to share more in depth about the learning process, and especially the recommendations, policy recommendations people are very interested in. So I hope that answers your question, and feel free to ask a follow-up one in the chat, or the questions, sorry.
Great, thank you so much. And then our last question that's here in the Q&A chat is, could LIPS and RIFs take on a connector role? So from your experience, maybe I'll lob this out to Anna or Stephanie or whoever would like to answer, but what do you really see maybe the expansion of this pilots for different agencies?
I can start, Anna, and then you can follow up. Yeah, I think that immigration partnerships can definitely help to connect people and connect agencies and build awareness in a community of what agencies are available in their region. But Michelle briefly mentioned this earlier, there is a very intentional and relational aspect to this connection that the LIP wouldn't be able to provide. And then the ownership goes to the SAW and the settlement agency to build those relationships and to get connected and to spend time getting to know each other and each other's systems, so that you can work creatively together moving forward. And I'm not sure what you'd like to add.
Well, I would like to totally echo what you said, Stephanie. I think that relational and the intentionality of that relationship is so important. And it's so important to have those one point of contact within one organization, one point of contact within another organization to ensure success. I think that was instrumental. But in our observation with this pilot, specifically in this year, I think the roles have also almost been reversed to what is being asked in this question. Like, I think, Stephanie, you and I have been very much informing LIP, our local immigration partnership here in the region of Waterloo, about what's going on with the project. So everybody within the settled steering committee here knew about our successes, knew the story. We've been updating people on that, but it was more of a reflective role than for the LIP, I think, in that. And we've definitely kept everybody and other agencies involved in the settlement sector in the region informed about the pilot.
All right, thank you.
I would just add to that, just from my perspective of knowledge dissemination and mobilization, I think LIPs have a major role to play in that sharing of maybe some best practices And definitely, you know, one challenge is that LIPs are different all across the country, as many of you will know, you know, and so are settlement agencies, right? So there isn't that consistency in order to just say like LIPs would be a connector role, but I think that there's a really important role that they do play in understand and like improving understanding, because one of the things we saw was the biggest barrier to teamwork was a lack of understanding of roles and responsibilities among settlement and sponsorship. It's mutual, and there's challenges of trust, of not seeing the other as an ally. And so I think we need to continue to work to create spaces where sponsors and settlement workers work more closely and have a chance to share information. That's the pilot we didn't talk about today, was a knowledge exchange pilot in the Kingston area. And they had some great success doing informal, you know, knowledge exchange opportunities, building community, even virtually, which was not the anticipated kind of way to do it, but building that community capacity to work better together. So I would imagine that LIPs definitely have a role to play at that level as well. Like the work is not done on that kind of understanding of how the sectors fit together.
Great, thank you so much. I have a quick question for Andrea. So my question for you is, I think one of the biggest barriers that we've heard as we present some of the our best practices or recommendations is the capacity on different levels for both SAWs and settlement workers. So I just maybe wanted yourself, and maybe after Stephanie, to maybe explain through the process of the pilot, what exactly was the added workload? Like, what did this take for you to do on a daily basis, the activities of the pilot and this collaboration model?
Sure, thanks, Lorene. Case management always, anytime you have a case management client, it's always a lot more work because the client is not always as independent and they can't do the tasks as easily on their own. So working with these clients, there's a lot more direct contact with me to the client, constant communication throughout the week, either through emails and phone calls. It makes it a lot harder online as well, because people don't respond as quickly as they would if the client was sitting right in front of you. So if the client was with you, we could get the task done and move on. But online, you don't get a response for a few days, and then you have to follow up. So that added to the workload. It also added to the workload working with the sponsor as well. That's not something that I typically do on a daily basis. And so communicating what was going on to the sponsor, communicating their needs and concerns, working on that, also making sure that they understood that what they see as needs may be different for what the client sees as their needs, and making sure that the client's needs are what were being met essentially in the end. So it was a lot more work, just the communication part, making sure everybody understood what was going on, understanding the process, and then making it happen. I think in this case, it was a little bit, I was lucky that we were working from home and we had less clients than we normally would. If we were in the office, I think our caseload would be a lot heavier, in addition to then having my case management clients. So in this case, I was able to manage them a lot easier with fewer clients accessing services because they were online. But I think we managed. It was a lot of work, but we did manage.
Great, thank you. Maybe Stephanie, in perspective of a SAW?
Yeah, in terms of workload, I think working with Andrea really allowed us to share the workload. There's a lot of questions that I had around settlement and services, and especially within the context of COVID, as well as different things would open and shut and change, and things began to be done online. As I was supporting sponsors, I was able to go to Andrea to ask questions of how, like, when you had to do this, what was the best process in order to do that? And so that didn't increase my workload. It made it smoother and more efficient. I think also for high needs cases, previously, if we had high needs cases, I would do a lot of the work myself in terms of researching and connecting to various agencies and figuring out the best way to support a high needs client. But now for the participants in the pilot project, we were able to collaborate together, and two brains are better than one. And so we were able to support each other with some of these high needs cases instead of trying to solve some of these problems individually. And I think also this pilot project was doing a lot of proactive work of connecting a newcomer right from the very beginning to supports, and alleviating perhaps workload that could come later on. If they weren't being connected, perhaps they would become high needs cases if they weren't properly integrated to the right supports. And so I think that this pilot project was also, with that pre-arrival meeting with the sponsor, and then right away having a meeting with the newcomer after arrival as well, was very proactive in coming together to ensure the supports were there right at the beginning before the families could veer off too far from the supports that they could access.
Great, thank you so much. One last question, maybe I'll direct this to Anna. I'm just wondering a little bit more about the transition to including month 13 cases. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the difference of, it had to have been done because of the lack of arrivals and COVID-19, but what did you really see as the key difference as you were doing the case management model between newly arrived cases or people who were transitioning into month 13?
I think Andrea would be a better person to answer that, but I'm going to start, Andrea, and pass it on to you if you don't mind. So I think the whole decision to include month 13 was in the beginning dictated, if you want, by the COVID-19 pivoting that was happening on our end. And no new arrivals, like Andrea suggested, between, I think, middle March and almost September. So we're only looking at two cases, and we really wanted to make sure that this project works and we really test the model. So we've included, thank you very much, Michelle, for that decision to include month 13 clients in that pilot. If anything, I felt the observations that we had from month 13 clients were only further enhancing, I think, our realization for the needs that were there even before we started that project, for that information about settlement services being available to sponsorship groups and to PSR clients from the very beginning of the process. And what we were seeing as gaps in the month 13 clients and some of the problem areas were the demonstration of the lack of that information from the very beginning, the lack of access to settlement services from the very beginning. But I will let Andrea to elaborate on that more, because I think you had firsthand experience with that.
Thanks, Anna. I would completely agree with what you just said. Comparing the new arrivals to the month 13 clients, the new arrivals, they access the services right away, and they've been connected to the programs that they need. And these clients are now independent. They're on their own. They are coming to me only when they have a quick question or need help with something small. They're living independently, which I think is amazing. Whereas our month 13 clients, they weren't receiving the services and support that they needed during their sponsorship. And their sponsorship in some cases had already ended, and they were still relying completely on their sponsors for support because there was no independence or guidance. There was no guidance to form independence throughout their sponsorship. And so I found that with the month 13 clients, they actually had a lot of needs. There's a lot of hand-holding. And even with the pilot being done, the case management for our month 13 clients is going to continue because they still need that support. They're still working on their independence, and that's just because it's been learned that they've had somebody to do these things for them, and they haven't learned how to do things on their own. So these clients have needed a lot more support than the pilot clients, the original new arrivals.
All right, so thank you so much. So it does go to show a little bit of the no one-size-fits-all model. I think each case and their needs becomes incredibly complicated when you get down to the nitty-gritty day-to-day life and how you integrate into a new country. And I think this is exactly what the pilot is hopefully getting at. How do you make this process smoother, even by just a little bit, and collaborate better so there isn't a huge duplication of work between the sponsors who are also trying to guide them and the settlement workers who are also trying to guide them. So thank you so much. I don't see any new questions in the chat box. So I will maybe wrap things up in case anybody has any last minute ones. This is your last chance. And if not, then please, to learn more, you can visit our website, the Allies for Refugee Integration, hosted on the OCASI website, and sign up to our newsletter on MailChimp. So this is where we'll be disseminating some of our recommendations and learnings from all of our pilots. So if you're interested in learning more, this will be happening in the next couple months. Our project ends June of this year, so it'll be done before then, where we'll really send out all of this information to you. So again, the PowerPoint is on your platform on the P2P feed loop website, along with the CAP form and other resources. And of course, you can contact us if you have any other questions. And yeah, I think that is it. So thank you so much to our panelists. Great job. And YMCA, Mennonite Coalition, Mennonite Central Committee, and of course, Michelle, thank you so much for all of the work that you do.
Thanks, Lorene.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.